Hi, I'm John Cash, and welcome to John Cash Ministries and Revelations Church's Daily Devotion. Today, I want to talk about this. What to do when God says no, and He means it. Let's take a look at Deuteronomy chapter 3, verses 23 through 26, and then we're going to look at verse 28. The Bible says, "At that time I pleaded with the Lord." This is Moses. "O sovereign Lord, you have begun to show to your servant your greatness and your strong hand. For what God is there in heaven or on earth who can do the deeds and mighty works you do? Let me go and see the good land beyond the Jordan, that fine hill country in Lebanon." He wanted to go into the promised land. Verse 26, "But because of you, the Lord was angry with me and would not listen to me." Now then he's speaking to Israel because of Israel. "That is enough," the Lord said. "Do not speak to me anymore about this matter." Let's just stop right there. What in the world is going on? Well, we got to go back to another part of Deuteronomy. And Israel's in the desert. They're thirsty, and they need water. They can't find it. So Moses seeks God. God says, "Take your staff and speak to the rock, and water will gush through from the rock." Well, Moses took his staff, and he bammed the rock. He struck the rock. He hit it, in anger most likely. That's not what God told him. Now you're like, well, that's such a minor infraction. There was something more to it. Folks, Moses had been dealing with these people who were obstinate. They were unfaithful. Come on. They built the golden calf. So he had been dealing with these people for a long time. Now, what really was going on is bitterness and unforgiveness was beginning to enter Moses' heart. And so when God told him to speak to the rock to bring water for the people, well, Moses struck it. Now that rock, by the way, was symbolized as Israel. Jesus is even symbolized as the rock of our salvation, Peter. But the rock was also hard. In other words, Israel was hard-hearted. But God could take a hard-hearted person and bring water, life-saving water for them. A lot of symbolism there. But here's the bottom line. Moses had disobeyed God. He was a great leader. He was a great man, but he had disobeyed God, and he had become embittered in his heart toward the people. And God knew that he needed a leader who was not going to be holding in that bitterness toward his people. Have you ever met leaders, pastors, Sunday school teachers, youth leaders who become so angry with the people that they could not love them anymore? Well, Moses, I think, had reached that point. Now, here in the Bible, we see Moses buttering up God. Do you see this in verse 24? Okay? He says, "Greatness, strong hand. What God is there like you? Mighty works." In other words, he is buttering up God, hoping God's going to change his mind. "Oh, come on, let me go see the promised land." Boy, I bet he wanted to see the promised land. But see, God said no. He said no. He was going to have Joshua do it. Now, you know, folks, here's the bottom line. When God says no, we need to accept it and move on. See, God forgave Moses' sin, but the consequences for that sin remained. And he needed a new leader, someone who would love the people through their sin. Someone who would be long-suffering as God is long-suffering. And God said, "That's enough. I'm done. I'm not going to listen to you anymore." For those of you who've had kids or have kids, you know how they can take you right to the edge when you say no and they keep asking, "That's enough. You're done." This is what happened here with God and Moses. And then what did God instruct Moses to do? Look at verse 28. He said, "But commission Joshua and encourage and strengthen him, for he will lead this people across and will cause them to inherit the land that you will see." In other words, I love this. God said, "Moses, I've heard enough. You're not going. End it. Joshua, he's a man after my heart. He is going to take your job over. So I want you to encourage him, and I want you to get him ready. Strengthen him, Moses. Help him be ready to lead these people." That had to be tough. Look, I think this was tough on Moses. This was tough on God. But it was the right decision. Folks, when God says no, accept it. Because if you don't, you will become embittered toward God and angry with God. And your faith will stumble. And you'll fall on your face. So accept no and trust God that He knows what's best for you, the people around you, and His kingdom. And I might add, there's no person out there with great ministries, a great walk with God, who don't make the occasional mistake where God has to discipline them and occasionally tell them no. We're all subject to that. God bless you. Thank you for your support of John Cash Ministries and Revelations Church.